Is God calling you to a career in ministry? Our internship program and 2K2, our ministry apprenticeship program, are designed to give hands-on training and allow you to gain valuable ministry experience. If you're excited about what God is doing through Elevation Church and have a calling to join us, apply today at training@elevation.com.
Hey, thanks for joining us for today's message. We believe that God has something that He wants to say to you no matter where you are. And we hope that you enjoy this week's message from our series, Elevation Staycation, as we hear from Uptown campus pastor, Jonathan Josephs.
It's really cool. You know, we have some awesome campus pastors that lead our campuses and take care of the people. And I wanted to take some time this June for you to get to know some of them better. Particularly some that you may not have heard from before. Today you're gonna get to meet our Uptown campus pastor. Come on, Uptown. Celebrate your boy. His name is Jonathan Josephs. He hails from Canada. He does. He hails from Canada. And he's a good guy. He's been in our church for a couple of years now. He was a part of our apprenticeship program where we bring through different people who feel a calling to ministry. Maybe you're watching online or on Periscope and you feel a calling to ministry, and we have a way to train and equip leaders, and many of them become staff members. And so it's a really cool thing. And God's raising up a lot of awesome leaders. Jonathan and Anna Josephs have a son called Zion. He's very little, which means they sleep very little. And but I got to tune in and hear him preach this message last night. He did a great job. He's gonna give you a great word today. Come on, jump up on your feet in every location if you're not up. Welcome to the stage, our Uptown campus pastor, as he brings the Uptown funk to all of our locations. He is Jonathan Josephs. Give him some love.
And thank you, Pastor Stephen. What's up to all of our locations? And hey, let's just give one more special shout out to my favorite campus, the people at Uptown. What's up, Uptown? I love you guys. And for those of you who are tuning in from outside the Charlotte area, Uptown is the weird way what we call downtown. And so the Uptown location's right in the heart of our city. But you guys can go ahead and have a seat at all of our locations. Thank you, and thank you, worship team. One of the unique privileges I have as a campus pastor is getting to be a little up close to some of the great stories that are happening in our church. And if you're a part of Elevation at any of our locations, every week you see how people are responding to just the presence of God as God's word is being preached, and we see hands go up. And we get to hear a lot of those stories through baptism, but there's so many other stories that we might not ever hear. But sometimes as a campus pastor, we have the privilege of just kind of watching one of those stories unfold. And for me, one of the recent stories happening at the Uptown campus that's pretty cool is about a guy named Garrett. And Garrett has had a difficult life, struggled with drug abuse, and actually ended up dealing drugs at one point, found himself in and out of jail at different times. But Garrett had a friend named Jason. And Jason had a very similar story to Garrett, a lot of the same situations, but along the way, someone invited Jason to church. And Jason came to Elevation Church and gave his life to Christ, and he's been an important part of the Uptown campus ever since. And Jason knew that the same Jesus who rescued him from his bondage was the same Jesus who wanted to rescue Garrett. And time and time again, it seemed like their paths would cross, and every time Jason would invite Garrett to church. But Garrett didn't want to come to church, but Jason kept inviting him. And his persistence is a great example of the power of saying. We learned about the power of saying at the beginning of the year. And I think it's neat that Garrett finally decided to come to church during that series at the beginning of the year. Garrett gave his life to Christ, and which is amazing. And like all of us, Garrett's still trying to figure out what it means to walk in all of God's purposes for his life. But Garrett knew one thing for sure. He knew that God had changed him on the inside and that he was a new creation. And so he declared that through baptism. We had the privilege of baptizing him at our Uptown campus. And then Garrett invited his mom to church, and she came because she saw the change in her son's life, and she gave her life to Christ. Amazing, amazing. And I love that that really is the story of Elevation Church, just ordinary people stepping in to the opportunities that God's placed in front of us to make an impact, make a difference wherever we can. And just the other day, I was thinking about how I ended up here, kind of the journey for Anna and I getting to Elevation Church. We were at school, at university. Anna was doing her MBA. I was in seminary. And we just had a desire to be pastors one day, to help people grow in their faith and to build the local church and expand God's kingdom. And like so many people, Elevation Church was an inspiration to us. Before we ever stepped foot at an Elevation location, we were being inspired by your faith, And I don't know if you know this, but around the country, even other parts of the world, your faith is an inspiration to the body of Christ because of how God is moving in this house. And that was our story. We were being encouraged by Pastor Stephen's messages and by the podcast and just hearing the amazing testimonies coming out of this place. And it was so inspiring to us. You remember this at one point, we're like, man, wouldn't it be amazing to be in a church like Elevation one day? And I remember when Pastor Stephen came to our school to preach, and it was right around the time the book Greater came out. And because of the inspiration and the role model he had been in our life, we wanted the opportunity to meet him. And so we went down afterwards to get a copy of the book, and he was signing books. We thought maybe we'll get a chance to meet him. But the line was so long. So many people wanted to meet Pastor Stephen, get a copy of the book. So they were really having to move people through quickly. So we decided to take a little bit of a risk. And we thought, if we go to the back of the line, there's a chance that he'll have to leave before we ever get up there. But maybe there's a chance that if we're the last people, we'll have a moment just to talk with Pastor Stephen for a second and thank him for what he means to us. And so we went to the back of the line, and more people came. And we went to the back of the line again, and more people came. And we went back again, and more people came. And finally, we were the last people in line, and we went up and got to thank Pastor Stephen. And he asked quickly where I was from. I said, I'm from the Toronto area. We call it the GTA, the Greater Toronto Area. And I imagine it was just fresh on his mind because it was right around the time that the church had just sent John and Heather Bishop up to the Toronto area to launch our GTA location. What's up, John Bishop at Matthews? And what's up to our GTA location? All my Canadian people. And I imagine it was just fresh on Pastor Stephen's mind, but he wrote this on the inside of our Greater book. He said, to Jonathan and Anna, GTA, greater things ahead. And Pastor Stephen, I don't know if you knew it at the time, but those three words would give Anna and I the courage and the faith we needed to step into God's best for our life. And so I'm so thankful for a pastor who inspires us to believe God for greater in our lives. It really is our story. And man, after a weekend like last weekend was unbelievable. I'm also so thankful for a pastor who is so vulnerable. And after talking with so many people at the Uptown campus, Pastor Stephen, I know there's so many people in our church who just want to thank you for having the courage to be a prophetic voice to our lives in the body of Christ, to our nation. Can we just thank God for our pastor at all of our locations? Appreciate you, Pastor. Love you, Pastor. Well, I'm excited about the message that God's put on my heart to share with you today because this is a message that's come out of a place of struggle for me. This is something that God has been working out in my life. And so this isn't something I'm an authority on. This is a Me Too sermon. And one of the defining struggles of my life is this feeling of inadequacy. Do you ever feel like you're just in over your head? Do you ever feel like you just don't have what it takes? So often I think about the good things that God has placed in my life, the enormous blessings, the great opportunity, the sense of purpose that he's given me. But when I get to it, it always seems like there's something standing in my way and I just don't know how to move forward. I just question whether I'm the right person for the job. So often I feel inadequate and it leaves me frozen and paralyzed. And so I've been reading about Joshua. Joshua's this amazing character in the Old Testament who God had given an amazing purpose and assignment on his life. Just like all of us in this room, God has great promises that he's spoken over us. But I imagine that Joshua felt the same way I so often feel. And so I've been learning some things from this passage, and I want us to read it together. If you have your Bibles, you can turn to Joshua chapter 1. Otherwise, you're welcome to follow along on the screens. It's a few verses, bear with me. Joshua chapter 1, it says, after the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' aide, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now then, you and all these people get ready to cross the Jordan River into the land I am about to give them to the Israelites. I will give you every place where you set your foot, as I promised Moses. Your territory will extend from the desert to Lebanon, and from the great river, the Euphrates, all the Hittite country to the Mediterranean Sea in the west. No one will be able to stand against you all the days of your life. As I was with Moses, so will I be with you. I will never leave you nor forsake you. Be strong and courageous, because you will lead these people to inherit the land I swore to their ancestors to give them. The title of my sermon today is Do Your Thing. And of course, I'm gonna need you to touch 3 people around you. At all our locations, touch 3 people, tell them, do your thing. Lake Norman, we're waiting on you. Touch 3 people, do your thing. And so Joshua is given this amazing assignment from God to lead his people to occupy the land that God had promised them so many years before. What an amazing opportunity. What an incredible calling. And that's how I so often feel when I think about the opportunities and the blessings that God has placed in my life. I feel that way as a campus pastor. I feel that way as a husband. I feel that way as a dad. And I don't want you to think I'm like a complete failure and you're like, why should I listen to this guy? He just doesn't know what he's doing. It's not that. I believe God's given me a great sense of purpose. I see God using me in my life. I see how he's using me, the impact I'm able to have. I see myself moving forward, but it just seems time and time again in my life, I find myself at the edge of another Jordan River and I just don't know what to do. And I especially feel this way as a new dad. Like Pastor Steven said, I became a dad just 8 months ago. We had a son named Zion. And one thing I've learned about being a parent so far, I know I'm new at this, and there's a lot of things I still have to learn, but there's one thing I've learned for sure. And that is if you have a cute kid, people just tend to like you more. I don't know what it's like if you have an ugly kid, but if you have a cute kid, people just tend to like you more. And so selfishly, I want to show you a picture of my son Zion, get you to like me a little bit more, but that's Zion and my wife Anna right there. Notice the Elevation tank top, that's swag. And I remember when Anna told us that we'd be expecting a child, and we were just so excited. What an amazing opportunity that God would give us. And in our zeal and excitement, we just started doing everything we could to prepare. We were just determined that we would be the best parents ever. Our kid would never have sugar, and our kid would sleep through the night from day one. And we're just like, we're gonna be so intentional and do everything we can to be the best parents. We were just excited. And so we started preparing, and so we started getting the nursery ready, and Anna bought a lot of books that I'm assuming she read, and I downloaded different apps on my phone that would compare the size of the child in her stomach to different fruits and veggies. It was so helpful to know my kid was the size of a blueberry. And we started asking other people, other parents, what do we do, trying to get all the advice we could. And then if you're a parent, you remember when the day finally arrives, you're standing in the hospital. Well, if you're the man, you're standing in the hospital. If you're the wife, you're laying in the hospital. And I'm standing there, and our son is born, and the doctor comes over, and he puts the baby in my arms, and suddenly I realized that all that preparation was absolutely meaningless. I'm standing there frozen, just in fear, like, you just put this miniature human into my arms. What am I supposed to do now? It didn't matter what books we read. We just felt so unqualified to care for this child, and all these fears started rushing into my heart. And just to put it into perspective, if you're not a parent, to drive a car, you have to pass a test. And then after you pass the test, you have to spend time driving around with someone who actually knows how to drive. That's just for a car. And they're gonna let me leave with this baby? I'm like, you're not coming with me to help me out? You're just gonna let me walk away? Just take it just like that? With a human life? And we felt so unprepared. And when we're in those moments in our life where we feel unqualified and uncertain and incompetent and inadequate, it has a way of causing us to freeze. And I know that as a parent, there's a lot more bigger battles that I'm gonna have to fight as Zion grows up. And maybe you're thinking, yeah, you're at the easy part. I know I just gotta keep them alive, keep them fed. We're doing good right now, but it's those parts in the future that I'm so intimidated by. How do I get Zion to just be a productive member of society? How do I get him to love God and love the church and love people the way I want to? How do I pass on my values? How do I teach him to find a great wife? I did it, but I don't know how I did it, so how do I teach them to do that. And I feel so intimidated by this responsibility. It's a blessing, but it's a responsibility. And maybe you feel that way about certain areas of your life. Maybe you're a mother here today and you sometimes feel like you just don't have what it takes. Maybe you feel like you're doing good just to get the kids off to school with matching socks, and then you get on Instagram and you see somehow all the other mothers have time to cut their kids' sandwiches they're packing into little dinosaur shapes. Or maybe you've been working at your job for several years now and you're doing good, you're doing fine, and people seem to like you, but there's a new opportunity. And you're hesitant to even take that promotion because it's a little bit different work, and you're worried, what if I'm not as good at that as I am at this? And what if people find out I'm not as smart as they think I am? Or maybe you're a student and you're not sure how to move forward in the things that God has for you because all the voices in your life are pulling you in different directions. Your parents have one expectation of you, and your coach is pushing you another direction, and your friends are pushing you another direction, and you feel frozen, feeling I'm so inadequate, I don't know how to move forward in the great things that God has for me. And so I think all of us have these moments in our life, again, not where we're actually failing, but so often we feel that way. We feel that way. We feel like we don't have what it takes. And we find ourselves at the edge of whatever the Jordan River is in our life, and our mind is being filled with doubt, questioning. We're questioning ourselves, and we feel like, I just don't know what to do. And what God is encouraging me with in this passage and in this story of Joshua is that even when I don't know what to do in my life, even when there's uncertainty, and even when I feel inadequate, there's always a few things that I can do. And so I want to talk to you about 3 simple things that I believe all of us can do in those moments of our life where we don't know what to do. And the first thing I want to talk to you today about is this idea that we need to clarify our calling. If you're taking notes, my first point is clarify your calling. Clarify your calling. God shows up to Joshua and is like, tag, you're it. You're it, Joshua. You're my new guy to take the people into the promised land. And so Joshua is given this incredible assignment from God that he's unprepared for, that he doesn't know what to do. And to make matters worse, he's stepping into the shoes of one of the greatest leaders that Israel had ever seen. You ever felt like you were in someone else's shadow? You ever look around and see other people who just seem to be doing something similar to you, but so much better than you? I feel that way all the time, and when I do that, it's so easy for me to feel inadequate. But look at this, to make matters worse, we read from Joshua 1 where God shows up and gives Joshua this calling. Well, the last verse of Deuteronomy, in Deuteronomy 34:12, it says this about Moses. It says, for no one has ever shown the mighty power or performed the awesome deeds that Moses did in the sight of all of Israel. What's it saying? It's saying that Moses is awesome and everybody knows it. Moses probably had better breath than Joshua. He's just better in every single way, and all the people know about it. And now Joshua is called to lead the people of Israel who had spent the last several years following a leader who God had moved mightily through his life. And I feel like that so often. Imagine having to preach at Elevation Church after Pastor Stephen just absolutely killed it last week. What a powerful message. That's intimidating. Or even as a campus pastor, when I became the campus pastor at Uptown, I was so thankful for the opportunity. I was excited. I felt like it was something that God had equipped me for. And I was so grateful to be able to be given that opportunity. But the problem was, I felt like I was stepping into the shoes of a great leader who had gone before me. Because before I became the Uptown campus, Joel Delph, your Blakeney campus pastor, was the Uptown campus pastor. Blakeney, you love Joel Delph? Yeah, of course you do. Of course you do. That's the problem. Everybody loves Joel Delph. The guy's amazing. He works out 8 days a week. He's so good looking. And I feel like the only time people are ever looking at me is because they want to figure out what ethnicity I am. And they love Joel. And so, man, I step on the campus at Uptown and I feel God's called me to it, but I get there and I just feel like suddenly I don't know what to do. I'm frozen. How do I help this person? And what do I say in this situation? And what do I do? And I felt so inadequate living in somebody else's shoes because in all seriousness, how God's working through Joel's life and how God used him at the Uptown campus and how God is continuing to use him in this house is amazing. And Joel had really taken that campus to a great place, and I felt so intimidated to do it. I felt like God had called me to it, but once I got there, I felt frozen. I just don't know what to do right now. And so I get on the campus, and all I would hear is, we love Joel so much, and Joel's so relational, and Joel's so nice, and Joel's so funny. Joel. And I would go to Joel and I would say, hey, Joel, you gotta help me out. Like, I got this situation going on and you're a legend, so what would you do? And hey, Joel, what would you say to this person? And what would you do here? And what Joel would say to me would become so helpful in my life, not just as a campus pastor, but in every area of my life. He would say, don't worry about what I did, just do what God called you to do. So helpful, so freeing. And it allowed me to see this text differently because I'm thinking Joshua must have felt so intimidated to have to walk in Moses' shoes. And then I realized that God never called Joshua to walk in Moses' shoes. God called Joshua to simply be Joshua. In Joshua 1:5, he says, as I was with Moses, so will I be with you. He's not calling Joshua to be like Moses. He's saying, I'll be with you like I was with Moses. Same promise, different purpose. And God's promises over my life and your life are the same. His word is filled with promises that he's given us, but our purposes are different. And God is asking us to clarify our calling and realize that he's calling us to simply be us. Only you can be you. If Joshua was consumed with walking in Moses' shoes, they would have spent another 40 years wandering the desert. Why? Because Moses' shoes were meant to lead the people out of something. But Joshua was graced to lead the people into something. And so God had a different purpose, but promised them the same presence in his life. And it's so freeing to realize that the best thing I can be is simply me. God hasn't graced me to be Joel Delph. God hasn't graced me to be Pastor Stephen. God hasn't graced you to be your mother. God hasn't graced you to be your coworker. God has called you to be you. And only you can be the best you. And we'll always feel unqualified. We'll always feel inadequate in our lives when we're spending all of our energy trying to be something God has never created us to be. And in Joshua's life, I realized that God is giving him an assignment. He is asking him to do something. But more than that, God is speaking to something deeper. He's speaking to Joshua's identity. He says, be strong and courageous, be strong and courageous, be strong and courageous. Why? Because God knew that what Joshua would face in his life would change, but who Joshua needed to be would be the same. No matter what he was facing, God needed Joshua to be Joshua, and God needs you to be you today. No one else can be you. God needs you to be you. But isn't it interesting how we so often find our value and self-worth by what we're able to do? Do you ever go through a day and it was a good day based on how many things you got to check off your to-do list? When you're talking to a child, we always ask the question, what do you want to be when you grow up? But then when we meet someone for the first time as grown-ups, often the first thing we ask is, what do you do? And when did this idea of calling become so wrapped up in what we do rather than who God created us to be? And one of the best things that some of us can do today is simply put the to-do list aside for a moment and create a to-be list. Ask God, who are you calling me to be? Some of you, God's calling you to be an encourager. God's calling you to be a listener. And the best thing that you can do is simply be there for people and give them the strength and courage they need. Some of you, God's calling you to be generous. And maybe I'm speaking to someone who you feel like your life is meaningless and you're acquiring more and more things thinking that will make you feel like your life matters. And maybe the reason that God is blessing you isn't so that you'll be rich, but maybe he's blessing you so that you'll be a blessing. And maybe God is asking you to be you today and do the thing that he created you to do. Because there's an assignment that God has given each of us in our life, and we each have a part to play, but you'll only be able to do the things that God has called you to do when you become the person that God has called you to be. Got to clarify your calling. Touch your neighbor, tell him, I can't do your thing. I got to do my thing. You got to do your thing. I got to do my thing. You got to do your thing. But here's the frustrating part. I'm like, all right, God, I know who you've called me to be. I'm Jonathan Josephs. I'm feeling good. I'm Jonathan Josephs. And then I get to whatever Jordan River is in front of me, whatever situation it is, and suddenly I'm reminded once again that those voices of doubt flood my mind, and I realize that even as me is still a little disappointing. Even as me, I still don't have what it takes. Even as me, I still don't necessarily know what I'm doing. And suddenly I'm reminded over and over again that even as myself, I'm still insufficient to do the things that God has called me to do. Sometimes I don't have the energy. Sometimes I don't have the strength. Sometimes I don't have the wisdom. Sometimes I don't have the idea that I need next. Maybe you're a business owner, and even as you started the business from nothing, you brought it to this place, and you feel stuck, and you're wondering if you're the next person you're the person to take it to the next level. And even as you feel a little paralyzed, like, I'm not sure what to do right now. And what I see in this passage is God asking me to do something in my life, and what I hear God speaking to me in those moments where even as me, I feel inadequate, God is asking me to deal with my doubts. Deal with my doubts. Deal with my doubts. See, I believe that doubt is a seed, and what it becomes is largely determined by what I do with it. When we let our doubt go unmanaged, it grows into the weed of discouragement and the weed of fear that holds us back from the very dreams and destiny that God's placed in our hearts. And that's why I hate that voice of doubt so much in my life, because I see it holding me back from opportunities and good blessings that God has given in me in my life. And so I spend so much energy trying to eliminate those voices of the in crowd. You know the in crowd? Inadequacy, incompetent, insufficient. And they drive me nuts, and I want to eliminate them, but I realize that God is just asking me to deal with them. I can't get rid of them. I got to deal with them. Because when I deal with them, that seed of doubt can become something much greater than fear and discouragement. Instead of letting that seed of doubt become fear, I can allow it to produce great faith in my life when I deal with my doubts. Here's why. In Joshua 1:9, God says to him, have I not commanded you, be strong and courageous? He's reminding Joshua of who he is. He says, do not be afraid and do not be discouraged. Don't let doubt get to that place in your life. He says, why? For the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. When I think about what God's called me to, I expect to hear God say, don't be afraid and don't be discouraged because I've given you everything you need. But that's not what God says to him. He doesn't tell Joshua that he has everything he needs. He says, don't be afraid and don't be discouraged because I'm with you wherever you go. I'm with you. And it's comforting to me for me to know that in this calling that God has given me, in this assignment, in these blessings, in these opportunities that he's placed in my life, I'm not doing it alone. There is a God who is with me along the way. And maybe doubt is a gift that God gives us to produce dependence on him. Maybe doubt is the very seed that God gives us to remind us that when we're insufficient, we have a need for an all-sufficient God. I'm spending so much energy trying to shake those feelings and eliminate that doubt, and God is asking me to deal with it and let it produce the faith that brings me to a place where I'm more reliant on him. And one of the best things we can do is deal with our doubts by inviting God into the places where we feel insufficient. God, I need you in my marriage. God, I invite you into my business. God, I invite you into this relationship. God wants us to deal with our doubts, because it's only when we realize that we can't do that's the only time we'll be able to see what God can do. And I want to see what God can do in my life. And God gives me these weaknesses. God gives me these limitations to remind me that I need him. And I can let that seed of doubt grow up into faith, dependence, reliance on the God who called me. I got to deal with my doubts. Deal with my doubts. And as I deal with my doubts, and I allow that to stir up faith in my heart, knowing that God is with me, and as I embrace who he called me to be, and I'm being Jonathan Josephs and you're being you, I still get to this end of this edge of this Jordan River, this thing in front of me standing between me and the promises that God has given me. And faith always requires action. Faith without works is dead. And so as much as God is giving me courage in my mind and reconciling things in my heart, there's still a point where I actually have to do something about what God has called me to do. And that's where Joshua finds himself. God is saying, be strong and courageous. I'm with you. But Joshua still has the assignment of leading the people across the Jordan River into the promised land. And for each of us, I know that there are so many battles that we're going to have to face beyond the Jordan River. And I know it's so easy to get intimidated and scared by those things. But right now, there's a Jordan River in front of each of us. And of course, it's symbolic for whatever's standing in front of you today. Maybe your past has a way of getting out in front of you time and time again. Maybe it's that addiction. Maybe it's that thing that you're struggling with. Whatever that Jordan River is in front of you, God is asking us to cross it, to cross it, to cross it. But I find myself so often standing at the edge of this Jordan River wondering, what do I do now? God, I believe you've called me to this, but there's this issue of my finances standing right in front of me. And God, I believe you've called me to, you've said you'd give me a great spouse, but I'm tempted to compromise my values because I just don't know how to cross this river, and I'm sick of getting save the dates in the mail. Whatever this river is in front of you, God is calling you to do something about it. Because God called Joshua to cross the Jordan River and lead the people into the land he promised them. And if you're a Bible nerd, you know that this isn't the first time the Israelites had to stand at a body of water. If you remember when they were coming out of Egypt, they got to the Red Sea as Moses was leading them out. But the difference was this time, God spoke to Moses and said, stretch out your arm and I'll part the water. God told Moses exactly what he wanted Moses to do, and God told Moses exactly what he would do. But it's different for Joshua because Joshua isn't given any instruction and Joshua isn't given any specific promise from God. Joshua is simply told, cross the Jordan River. And the uncertainty is part of the reason I so often feel afraid and so often feel inadequate, because I'm standing at the edge of this river in my life and I know that God is calling me to go across, but I just don't know how he wants me to go across. Ever feel that way? And I believe that the last thing that God is asking each of us to do, and this is a step that no matter where you're at in life, I believe you can take, even when you don't have the rest of it figured out, and even when there's situations down the road that you're gonna have to face. There's a river in front of us all, and I believe that God is asking you to step into your stream. Step into your stream. Because so many times we're standing on the edge of this river and we're waiting on God. God, what do I do now? I'm here. You called me to cross, but what do I do now? But what I see in the story of Joshua, in Joshua chapter 3, they get to the Jordan River, and the Bible points out that it was in flood season because things are always a lot harder once we get there. And they're standing at the edge of the Jordan River and it's flooding, and Joshua has to put his faith into action. And God hasn't given him a specific instruction other than to cross. So Joshua did the only thing he knew how to do. He had to believe that if God was faithful in his past, God would be faithful in his present. And the same God who parted the water then could part the water now. And so it says that Joshua and the priest stepped into the stream. And the moment their feet touched the water, it says that God dried it up and they crossed on dry land. And I believe that God sent me here to tell somebody who's standing on the edge of your Jordan River, waiting on a miracle, that the miracle is waiting for you in the water. Step into your stream. The provision is there. The blessing is there. The breakthrough is there. And so many times we're waiting on God, saying, God, I'm waiting on faith. Can you do something about my situation? And God is saying, I'm waiting on you. Step into your stream. Get your feet wet. There's something that each and every single one of us can do about that thing standing in front of us that we're so intimidated by. You might not have all the answers, but I believe we can take a step. And in my life, I'm so busy, so preoccupied thinking about all the things that I'm uncertain about that sometimes rather than doing anything, I do nothing. And God is encouraging me that even when I don't know what to do, Jonathan, can you just take a step? Take a step. What's the step that God is asking you to take today? Maybe you feel that God's called you to be generous. Maybe that's who God's called you to be. But you feel like, I don't see any margin in my life to be able to do that, and I can foresee unexpected bills down the road. Maybe God's asking you to take a step. Just start somewhere. Just start somewhere. Maybe you feel like me as a parent, God, how do I get my kid to love you and to be the person you've called them to be? And how do I change his heart? And God's saying, don't worry about that. Can you take a step today? Just make a commitment to bring him to church each week. And maybe you're like, how do I change my husband's heart? It seems that no matter what I say, he won't change. And maybe God is saying, take a step and can you love him unconditionally? And can you continue to be faithful? God, I don't know how to change that person's heart. They seem so hardened to you. Okay, but can you take a step and bring him to church? Just invite him. Just invite him. There's a step that each of us can take. And I talked about clarifying our calling and dealing with our doubts and using those things as the momentum to give us the courage to step into our stream. But I think ultimately what God has been speaking to me through this passage and the thing I want to challenge you with today is this. Just do your thing. Do your thing. Because here's what I see in Joshua's life. Joshua had so many things to be intimidated by, but God had promised Joshua so much. And the parts of Joshua's calling that Joshua had to do were actually pretty simple. For the big things, God had given him a promise. And I realize in my life, the things that intimidate me the most, that I feel inadequate for, God has already given me a promise for. They're not my thing to do. God is asking each of us to do your thing. Do your thing. And here's why I wanted to tell someone today that when you do your thing, God can do his thing. Do your thing so that God can do his thing. Because it wasn't Joshua's job to part the Jordan River. He just had to take a step. And it wasn't Joshua's job to make the walls of Jericho come down. He just had to march. And it wasn't his job to make the sun stand still. He just had to fight. And so often I'm intimidated by what's out there, and God is saying, don't worry about that, just do your thing. Jonathan, can you step? Jonathan, can you march? Jonathan, can you fight? Keep doing your thing, because when you do what you can in the natural, we have a God who says, I'll do my part in the supernatural. Do your thing. Do your thing. Do your thing. God is saying to someone, hey, don't worry about restoring that relationship, but can you do your thing and make the phone call? Don't worry about changing that person's heart, but can you invite them? Don't worry about knowing everything you need to do, but can you take a step? Sign up to be a part of an E-team. We each have a thing that we need to do that only you can do. And our pastor's given us a vision to reach 100,000 people with the gospel of Jesus Christ. And if you're rooted in this house, there's a thing that God is calling you to do, but he's created you to be something. And only you can do the thing that he's called you to do. But you gotta step into your stream and do your thing. And when we do our thing, we'll see God do the supernatural time and time again in our church. What I love about Joshua's life is we read earlier about the end of Moses' life, but Joshua had a great ending to his life too. In Joshua 23, it says this, now I am about to go the way of all the earth. You know with all your heart and soul that not one of all of the good promises the Lord your God gave you has failed. Every promise has been fulfilled. Not one has failed. And God is speaking great things over my life, and God is speaking great things over your life. But he's asking us to do our thing, do your thing, so that he can do his thing in our life.